Well, welcome one and all to the Bike Racing Without Mercy training vlog, and I'm here with Mr. Paul the Monk Hamblet. We're here to film a max effort attempt at Box Hill by Paul himself, and I'll try and hang with him for a bit of the climb, the iconic part of the climb, the shadow a bit as well, in all honesty. And then we're going to practice a little bit of up and out of saddle versus inner saddle sweet spot work in order to kind of figure out what's optimal for the longer climbs if eventually we ever get to hit the Hort routes and things like that in Europe. But what's your plans over the summer?
Try and get abroad if possible.
Get abroad, yeah.
Anything big, climby.
He likes the Madon.
Yes, Madon is good.
Madon. I want to try that Madon. Infamous, infamous. Anyway, before we get too cold, we're going to crack on up Box Hill, have a little warm up, then we're going to go for Paul's full gas attempt, and then we'll do the science. Everyone likes a bit of science. This is Paul Piglet Hamblet's max effort on Box Hill. It's his data. Paul prefers Piglet to the Monk, by the way. Now you can see Paul driving an infernal pace. He's seated and planting at an imperial 88 to 92 RPM. He's an elite ex-rower, single sculls, so Paul knows a thing or two about digging deep in order to gut out a VO2 max effort. Observe here how Paul changes up a gear in order to get out of the saddle and push into additional resistance and get the benefit of the torque to accelerate past these folk. Now for those who are not aware of his work, Paul's engine is a big one and I simply don't have the power to even sit in his draft for the entire climb. So I'll show a little montage here of Paul's on-bike footage ahead of me picking him up just before midway for the hairpins, iconic road markings and sensational scenery. And as Paul vectors in on me, I was soft pedalling but remaining vigilant in order to make a large acceleration to stay on his wheel. And as we transition to me filming from behind, it's still Paul's data. And now we can take in Paul's technique. He's got a solid upper body and core, cadence in the high 80s to low 90s, and very little plantar flexing on the pedal stroke, i.e. the foot position is flat. So very little wasted energy in watts. And he propels the 5.5 kilogram Cannondale up box at a seriously impressive pace. Paul weighs about 4 kilograms more than me, but his bike has about a 3 kilogram weight advantage over my Colnago. So in terms of Newton's laws, gravity has us equally matched here, but not in terms of power. Because even in Paul's draft, his little accelerations are absolute hell for me, as you can tell from my breathing. I'm regularly up and out the saddle and mashing, no thoughts of elegance or refinement whatsoever. I deliberately stray out of Paul's draft from time to time in order to capture the better angles, all in the name of entertainment. You're welcome. On the third hairpin here, Paul's final out the saddle dig overpowers me and I start to ebb away, grimly doing my best to minimise the arrears. So I spent half the time on the climb, all of that in his wake, and I'm still getting dropped at the end. And to me this highlights the difference between an enthusiastic weekender, a Cat 3 or Cat A on Zwift such as myself, and an elite A+ on Zwift amateur such as Paul. Now his attempt here is also curtailed a few metres short due to the need to avoid others. You were going flat out. Your numbers are huge. I was putting down 400 watts the whole way.
Yeah.
Sorry, 400 to more, yeah. I was out of the saddle, just stay in your wheel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's okay. It was quicker than I've done before.
Well, I hope you enjoyed Paul putting it all on the line on a ragged edge there. And boy, was it difficult to stay with him for even like 2-3 minutes or whatever. Anyway, we're back at the bottom of box and it's time for the first of the ascents. And speaking of the Madon earlier, we're going to rev it like Lance. It's going to be seated and spinning.
We won't show a lot of the science, safe to say we targeted threshold power, i.e. 280 to 310 watts for me,
with a level of effort that felt sustainable for a longer climb. The data is all from my C60.
So I'm at about 280 watts, 290 watts. What are you at?
It says, yeah, 3. It's back between 280 and 330.
Yes.
300-ish.
That's how I'm going to keep it. So,
Where you are now, yeah?
yeah, perceived exertion feels nice.
Yes.
Morning.
Morning.
I let the cadence settle where it felt good, starting a tad low but finding a nice gear where I was floating on the pedals around 90 to 95 RPM. Exiting here the second hairpin, you can see that despite my best efforts, I still have a little plantar flexion on the left and right foot, i.e. my toes are pointing down a bit, and that does in turn waste a bit of power, I understand.
Morning.
As we near the end of the climb, you can see that this is pretty comfortable in terms of heart rate, cadence, and also a nice, stable upper torso, solid core, no bobbing around. Exiting the third hairpin, I ended this climb with a few more watts than was in the original game plan. But overall it felt good and I could have gone on for a lot longer. But at the end of the effort, there was indeed a little bit of lactic acid in the legs. So taking the data from the segment, 2.4 kilometers, climbing 127 meters in 6 minutes 52 seconds. Average power was 296 watts, average RPM 88. Average speed 20.9 kilometers an hour with heart rate of 163 BPM on average and a peak of 170. Now time to compare and contrast with the out of the saddle ascent.
Very nice.
Yeah, good that.
Yes. Yeah, that felt good. I was probably 290 to 310 watts throughout, and I could definitely feel the lactic acid in the legs. Well, we're back at St Jude's for ascent number 2. Our objective, for the same perceived effort out the saddle, do I get the same or more watts as seated and spinning? Let's find out.
For the out the saddle effort, it was once again a case of targeting threshold power and finding a rhythm and cadence that felt sweet. And you can see early on in the climb I'm about 10 watts higher and feeling good.
I wouldn't say easy. Feels okay though.
It's what we're doing a lot of on the Wahoo. But it is, in theory, more efficient.
Here on the second hairpin you can see that I found my rhythm and I'm swinging the bike a little bit from side to side. I think I could do a little bit more there, by the way. Also, I think it would have looked prettier had I been in the drops, but this did feel super comfortable. And my power, well, it was still about 10 watts high. Looking here at the replay, I can see that my heart rate was a tad higher out the saddle than when seated. Because when we hit the iconic markings, my heart rate's already at 170 BPM, and it took until the final hairpin to hit that when seated. But overall, I'm driving away at a very pleasant 60 RPM. And for me personally, whether indoors or out, this feels about right, letting the muscles do more of the work and keeping the fatigue at bay. As you'll see in a moment, Paul also found it easier out the saddle and got about 10 watts more. Albeit he concluded that it's something to mix in on the longer climbs in order to break up the majority of the work being in the saddle, which he perceived as being more efficient over the longer haul.
For my money, I'm a little bit more bullish because out the saddle can feel really good for prolonged periods of time for me, whatever the power zone. And I found it very useful when tiring at the end of a Zwift race or a long climb because it provides a very welcome break for seated and spinning.
Now the compare and contrast of the data. Once again, exactly the same segment, 2.4 kilometers plus 127 meters. This time 2 seconds quicker, 6 minutes 50 seconds. Average power was 7 watts higher at 302 watts. My RPM was 61 compared to 88. I averaged 21 kilometers an hour, only 0.1 kilometers an hour quicker than when seated. Heart rate was indeed a tad higher, 166 BPM compared to 163, and the peak was 172 compared to 170. In terms of the speed, as proven here outdoors on a relatively shallow 5% gradient, the extra power standing out of the saddle is almost exactly offset by the greater air resistance. But on a steeper climb, I'll personally take the additional out of the saddle power, please.
Well, I've got to say, I think I got more watts for about the same perceived effort. What about you?
Felt to me, yeah, a little easier, slightly more watts, but maintainable for a long period of time, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, you know, I could go on for maybe 20 minutes like that, but I mean, I felt really good towards the end. You know, definitely for the accelerations, for me, out of the saddle feels easier and the lactic builds up slower.
Indoors on Zwift, I highlight that the algorithm doesn't know if you're seated or standing, so some extra power out of the saddle can come in very handy to avoid getting dropped. Overall, to my mind, it's definitely worth practicing some zone 3 to 4 out of the saddle, but also having a weight training program that helps build up strength through your torso, core and legs, given the additional demands this places on the muscles.
Well, the level of grinning is at a peak. Behold. Look at that. There we go. Let's bring her in. There we sit. 50-50 left-right balance. Triumph at last. Riding the rollers definitely pays off. What about that?
Don't forget sun.
The sun. Oh yeah, the sun. Look at that. Look at that. The sun is out. It's shining on Paul and I. We're going to hear about his KOM attempt in a second, or his best efforts attempt in a second. But 50-50 left-right balance. Super pleased with that. It's been a wonderful day out. Unfortunately, on the way over here, loads of the roads were closed, so I couldn't go past my usual Marks and Spencers, and therefore, Paul,
yes.
I'm sorry, the Ice Spice bun isn't on the agenda. But fear not, I have something. Well, it's not nearly as good, but it's good. You got me into these, Paul. I refer, of course, to the Soren.
A solid choice.
The Soren for the climber. Solid choice, says Paul. These are pretty good though. They're not as good as the Ice Spice bun though. They really aren't. But they are pretty good. And now we have a proper reason for a little bit of excitement, because Paul has managed to track down his time on the official RRC Box Hill segment, 2.2 kilometers. Paul, did you get a PB, sir?
Yes, 5:34.
5:34. Let's hone in on that. Jane will put that up on the screen. 5:34, very nice time indeed. By contrast, my best effort when we're doing those Zwift comparisons that included the long drag before Box Hill was 6:06. So Paul, how much faster was it this time than last?
22 seconds, I believe.
Yeah, doesn't surprise me, because when I was just following you for the second half of the hill, I was having to invest some massive power. So for me, I think I did something like 2 minutes 40 at 405 watts, and that's huge for me. So sir, respect as always. Beautiful time. I reckon he's got a bit more in him as well, because he had to lay off the gas a little bit at the end there, because you're playing it safe. Yeah, a couple of seconds. Yeah, nice. Bodes well for the summer. It's been a real pleasure coming out of you today, Paul.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you.
And we'll get up to something out on the bikes again, hopefully in the countryside, with the sun out, hopefully.
Yes.
Very
Weather
soon.
riders.
Take care, sir.
Au revoir.